Hello from San Francisco and welcome to Crossing Borders with Nathan Lustig, where I have conversations with entrepreneurs doing business across borders and the people who support them, with a focus on those with some connection to Latin America. This episode is brought to you by LatamList.com. If you like this podcast, you'll enjoy Latam List's daily tech news reporting. One more personal plug before we get started. Crossing Borders, a venture capitalist guide to doing business in Latin America, is out. I took my experience living and working in LATAM for the past 8 years and paired it with excerpts from Crossing Borders conversations with more than 30 entrepreneurs. You can buy it on Amazon today. My guest today is Matias Rivera, founder of Fanatiz, a soccer streaming platform that allows people outside of Latin America to legally watch top LATAM soccer leagues. Fanatiz stream leagues from Argentina, Chile, Mexico, and more, along with the Copa Libertadores, the LATAM version of the Champions League, and the Copa Sudamericana, the LATAM version of the Europa League this year. Matias has been involved in entrepreneurship, NGOs, and philanthropy throughout his life, and has been a key building block of the Chilean tech ecosystem and its infrastructure. After studying in Chile and spending a semester at Harvard, Matias founded Jump Chile, LATAM's largest university startup competition. We first met because he was on the founding team of Start-Up Chile back in 2010, and then he went on to Patagonian Sur, a for-profit conservation effort in Chile. We talk about how he founded Reforestemos Patagonia, a crowdfunding campaign to raise money to replant trees that were destroyed by a massive wildfire. More than 100,000 people from 40 countries donated, which allowed Matias and his team to replant 500,000 trees, and he was featured in The Economist and many other worldwide publications. We talk about why Matias opted for a Stanford MBA, the LATAM tech ecosystem, how Matias thinks about growing a business, why he decided to start Fanatiz. We also cover philanthropy in Latin America and how it relates to early-stage investing, his advice to getting investment in as a LATAM founder, and how he used his own advice to get my firm, Magma Partners, to invest. I hope you enjoy my conversation with Matias Rivera. Hey Matias, thanks for taking the time to do this. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you for the invitation. Excited to be here.
No, of course. So where are we in the world today?
So we're in WeWork San Francisco, an Embarcadero center.
And what are you working on these days?
So I'm working on my new company called Fanatiz. Fanatiz is a subscription-based service to watch live sports content online. You can imagine it as a Netflix for live sports of sorts.
And how long have you been doing it?
I've been working on Fanatiz since 2016, so I guess it's almost 3 years now. Although we've only been live for over just about a year and a half.
And how did, say, the last 6 to 9 months go in the company?
So it's been a roller coaster, as I guess most of the participants in this podcast say. It's been a very, very busy year. We've essentially, it's a year. 2018 was a year we went from 0 to 1, and we've been growing super fast. We've been growing at 30% compounded month on month for 14 months in a row now, which at the beginning is easy, but as it starts getting bigger and bigger, it becomes getting pretty crazy.
And why this business rather than any other business? Why was this one that piqued your interest?
Yeah, so this is my fifth venture, my fifth startup, so to say. And I guess the common theme is finding a problem that is in need, that I think I can solve. And Fanatiz specifically was born as an idea when I was living here in California between 2014 and 2016, doing my master's. So as I was doing my master's, thinking about what's next, and watch soccer from their home countries. And they were using illegal services with very low quality streams, very frustrated, not always being able to watch what they wanted to watch. And I just saw there was a big one problem and two pain point, and three desperate users, which we're all told is kind of like what you want to find. And although the market for South American expats in the U.S. is not that big, I saw it as an entry point into a much more interesting industry trend, which is essentially the going online of TV content and live content. So we're seeing in the U.S. how pay TV is starting to get disrupted as an industry. It's a $100 billion industry, and an increasing amount of companies are taking their content online. In Latin America, it's still not happening, but we believe it's going to happen soon, and at Fanatiz, we're taking position to be ready to take advantage of that disruption. It's a $30 billion industry. So we believe being in between Latin America and Hispanic audiences, sports, and online distribution is a really interesting place to be in.
And did you always know you were going to be an entrepreneur? You mentioned this is your fifth venture, so you've been doing it for a while now.
Yeah, I guess I've always had a passion for technology since I was young, and for entrepreneurship for quite a while now. I guess I got involved in entrepreneurship while I was a computer science industrial engineer student at Chile, in the Universidad Católica de Chile. And I did an exchange program in Boston, and I got quite involved in the, this was 2008-ish, in the entrepreneurial community around MIT. I got quite involved with the MIT 100K contest, which is one of the big entrepreneurship contests. And a Chilean professor who was at MIT at the time, called Arnoldo Hacks, is a pretty prominent academic from Chile. We got to build a relationship, and he essentially told me about the impact that he saw MIT 100K having in the MIT community and in the Boston area in terms of entrepreneurship, and how in Chile there was very little along those lines. Entrepreneurship was not even a thing. Startups weren't a term. Most people were thinking about what job they were going to get. No one was thinking about an entrepreneurial career path. So a little bit inspired by what I saw in MIT 100K, I went back to Chile and started an entrepreneurship contest called Jump Chile back then. Now it's become Jump Chile. This was 2008. And since Jump Chile, I was only involved the first 2-3 years, but since it's really grown, it's become the largest university entrepreneurship contest in Latin America, and apparently one of the 5 largest in the world, I was told the other day, which is incredible and definitely not my merit. I just got the ball rolling way back when, but it's great to see it grow and thrive.
What was that like in 2008, trying to get students to do an entrepreneurship contest?
Yeah, it's I guess the way we came across it about it was thinking about incentives, and we were always very clear about creating a prize that didn't have any strings attached to it. It was $1 million pesos, which is about $1,500, which is not all that much of money, but when you're a student, it feels like a really lot of money. And we just said, send us an idea. We made it really easy to apply. It was a fairly short application and submission of an idea, frankly, and you could get $1 million pesos. So we would just kind of encourage people to sit down, maybe get with a couple of friends from other schools, because we really encourage interdisciplinary thinking, and just send an idea. And if it's a good idea, you'll get $1 million pesos. And that worked out pretty well and really picked up among the student community.
That's really interesting. So it's not a lot of money to get a bunch of the ball rolling.
Yeah, no, I mean, it felt a lot back then. The budget of the first edition of Jump Chile was 2 million pesos, which is like $3,500, and it was a challenge raising that capital, but we did it, and half of that was prize money, more than half, because $1 million was the first prize, but then you had a couple other smaller prizes. But yeah, that was my first. So it's a startup to promote startups. So it's like, borderline kind of like the definition of a venture, but it was creating something from nothing, an organization, a brand, a group of people, an idea, and mobilizing people to do something. So
where we first crossed paths was in 2010 in Start-Up Chile. And
yep.
You were part of the team that got that off the ground.
Yeah.
How did that story happen, and what was that like?
Yeah, so after I did Jump Chile in Universidad Católica in Chile, in 2008 and 2009, I was asked to lead or coordinate the entrepreneurship program of the university as a whole. So I got very involved, kind of at a little bit of a bigger level in entrepreneurship and academics in the university. I was still a student. This was my last year being a student, and I graduated at the end of 2009. I was thinking about what to do next. During my time working in entrepreneurship in the university, I had crossed paths with Nicolas Shea. And Nico was invited in early 2010. There was a change of government, and the first administration of President Piñera started. And Nico was invited to be the senior innovation advisor to the Minister of Economy. And I was really fortunate that Nico thought of me when he was thinking about building his team, and he invited me to be part of his team of innovation advisors to the Minister of Economy as well. It was 3 of us, and essentially the 3 of us had this mandate of promoting entrepreneurship and innovation in Chile, whatever that means. And our first challenge was really defining what we chose to define innovation to be. And there's no right or wrong answer, but we maybe a little bit arbitrarily decided to focus on startups and Silicon Valley style startups. And then the question was, what should we do to promote startups in Chile? And we thought there were several key challenges. One was a cultural challenge. One was a global networks challenge, and the other was a talent challenge. But not so much a talent challenge because we thought there was good talent, but just the way talent connected with the culture and the networks. And the solution we thought about for that problem was importing entrepreneurs from other parts of the world, primarily Silicon Valley, but from all over, frankly, so that we could get those soft elements into Chile and promote an entrepreneurial mindset in the country.
And once
you were part of the first batch.
Yeah, we were like company 5 or 6 to get there, I think.
Yeah.
And so,
guinea pigs.
Yeah, we were. What
for
was
good
it?
and for bad.
Yeah, for good and bad, I think. So speaking of good and bad, so the program gets started. It's something you guys thought up, and then all of a sudden there's these foreigners that arrive in Chile.
Mm-hmm.
What were some of the early days like, and what were some of the challenges that got overcome to build the program?
Yeah, so I remember when we were first thinking about Startup Chile, we were very enthusiastic and wanted to do something big fast. And maybe one of the most valuable pieces of advice I remember when I think backwards was someone who told us, just start with a pilot program. Start with something smaller just to validate what you think you know. And God, has that helped feedback? Was that feedback important? I think so. The first batch was 40 companies, and those 40 companies stressed everything in the system to the maximum. If it had been bigger, I think very possibly it would all have just like fallen apart just because there wasn't an organizational capacity to really make sure everything was properly taken care of, from opening a bank account to finding a house to getting internet in Corfo offices to like where will these people work, how will they get a visa, like so many things that come up. How do you get the money out of the government, how do you reimburse it, just so many complexities around running a program out of government that's usually slow and difficult to move.
I think one of the funniest ones that I think highlights some of the challenges was that I think it was at 4 p.m. every Friday in the government office they changed the password to the internet. So if you were on a phone call, it was done. It hung up. And then you had to go in and run around and find the new password.
I actually did not know that.
I think by month 2 we convinced the team to at least have like the passwords preset for a week or 2 in advance. And then by month 3 it was like, okay, fine, these guys are not going to do anything crazy. It's a government office, no one's trying to hack in here. And they kept the same password for like 3 years or 4 years after they had that set. And so there's just so many different challenges.
Yeah. It was quite the roller coaster.
So what did you do after leaving Startup Chile?
So after leaving government in late 2011, I joined a company called Patagonia Sur. And Patagonia Sur was a project that was really interesting to me because it combined a lot of things that I thought were pretty unique, particularly in Chile, in the sense that it was a for-profit startup or venture founded by incredibly experienced and successful people from multiple different backgrounds, but both U.S. and Chilean. Warren Adams, the founder and sort of original visioneer of Patagonia Sur, had built the first social network after his MBA at Harvard back in 97 or so. This is way before Facebook. And he sold it to this small company that was selling books online called Amazon. A guy called Jeff Bezos, very, very kind of like early stage entrepreneur. Warren sold it for $100 million or so. And Patagonia Sur was part of kind of like his next career phase and philanthropic / business project. And it was a fund to invest in ecosystems in Patagonia to protect them, but for profit. So the question was, how can we protect the environment and make money at the same time? Challenging the usual assumption that if you make money, you're bad and you create a bad impact. And if you want to do good and create a positive impact in the world, you can't make money. And I thought that was not something that had to be so. And Patagonia Sur was a really interesting exercise, an experiment to try and find a model where you could combine a profit with impact. Today, I guess the category is called social entrepreneurship, social innovation. It's become more of a theme, but back in 2010, 2011, it was still a relatively new idea, and I just thought it was really compelling both because of the business model, the people that were involved, and just kind of like the career opportunity.
What were some of the highlights of projects that either you did while you were there or that it's done since then?
Yeah, I think pretty early on, I had only joined Patagonian Sur for a couple of months. I was general manager there. And there was this huge fire in Torres del Paine National Park in the south of Chile. And Torres del Paine is sort of the Yosemite of Chile. It's, a place that everyone loves. It's a very emblematic place for Chile. And it, a big chunk of it, over 16,000 hectares, would be like 35,000 acres, 40,000 acres, burnt down and were destroyed. And the government had no resources or teams or capabilities in place to take care of the problem. There was no one really who had the expertise required to confront the challenge and reforest and recover this national park and these destroyed areas. And in Patagonia Sur, one of the business lines that the company had been working on was carbon offsets through native species reforestation. So Patagonia Sur had developed the expertise to plant native trees in Patagonia, which was something that no one else was doing and no one else, frankly, knew how to do. So I saw, again, a little bit in the solving a problem and figuring out how I can help be a solution. I saw on the one hand a national park that was burnt down, big national crisis. On the other hand, a country, citizens, companies that was really sensitivized to sensitized.
I don't know. It works.
It works.
We're there.
About the problem and wanted to help, but really didn't know how to help. And then I was in Patagonia Sur, where there was a team of forestry engineers, and we had a stock of trees, and we knew how to plant them. And I guess I kind of visualized the possibility of creating a parallel NGO, because obviously this was an environmental crisis in national park, and if we wanted to ask for donations, making a nonprofit made most sense. And I saw on the one hand that we could maybe get permission from the government to reforest in Torres del Paine. I knew Patagonia Sur had the capability of providing kind of like the forestry expertise and the trees, and then raising capital from citizens and corporates. So that was the birth of a project called Reforestemos Patagonia, which we launched shortly thereafter. I think most notably, we created a crowdfunding platform, which has to this day a virtual forest where people logged in and saw great trees that were burnt down, could click on the trees, connect them to the social media profiles, donate $4 back then, and if the tree would turn green, they would get a certificate with the exact georeference coordinates of where the tree would be planted. A post would go on their Facebook wall saying they had just planted a tree in Patagonia. People would like it, share it, which was, again, kind of like early viral techniques that weren't so used so often. Actually, Facebook now won't allow you to do that, but back then we did it without any consideration, and it really took off. It became it was very we had a very strong PR campaign around it, and today, 7 years later, we planted more than 500,000 trees. We've received donations from over 100,000 people. I think it's the largest crowdfunding initiative in Latin America. I don't know of any other crowdfunding initiative that has received donations from 100,000+ people from more than 60 countries. So it's been pretty big, and today it's one of the prominent environmental NGOs in the country.
It's really interesting. It's a great project that I think would be interesting to see if there's a way to emulate that other places in the world.
Yeah.
Because half a million trees is a ton of trees.
Yeah, but the problem is much bigger. So it's a lot of trees, but the magnitude of just the environmental need is so daunting. I frankly think of the impact of Reforestemos Patagonia. Now it's called Fundación Reforestemos, because it's expanded its work throughout Chile, and not only Patagonia now, is in creating an awareness around the problem. But the 500,000 trees, although it's a lot, and it's been the result of an enormous amount of work and effort, is just a drop in the bucket compared to the size of the problem. So I think there's an educational component. I think there's a cultural component. I think there's a component of making people feel an emotional connection with Patagonia and the environment, and taking care of it more, and educating about the importance of protecting forests and avoiding forest fires, but also public policy influence. And really, I think these things, if the government doesn't step up, it's very hard for civic society to really be able to make a dent in the problem, big picture.
So sort of taking a little bit of a left turn on this, but you raised a bunch of money to make this happen.
Yep.
And one of the things that we've talked about offline before is philanthropy in Latin America and how it compares to the U.S.
Yeah.
And you've written one of, as far as I've seen, one of the most in-depth documents on this and what the cultural differences are and why. So can you talk a little bit about why you studied that and then what you found?
Yeah, sure. So this goes back to 2008. So the same time that Jean Pousset was born conceptually. So I was doing a program in Harvard College. It's called the Visiting Undergraduate Student program. And around that time, I was thinking about what I would write my thesis on when I finished engineering. And I knew I didn't want to do fluid mechanics of how water behaves in a pipe and the kind of like the usual stuff that engineers write about. But I didn't know what I wanted to write about. And I met a Chilean called Mario Valdivia while I was in Harvard. He was doing a research period, a term in the Harvard Kennedy School. And he was asking himself about how philanthropy is different in the U.S. and Chile and other Latin American countries, and what are the drivers for that. I was fascinated by the topic and by kind of like what he was thinking about, and I offered him to be sort of a right hand kind of like research whatever to write down what he was thinking, and I got very involved in after that. And I spent almost a year researching, essentially trying to explain why individual philanthropy is so much larger in the U.S. than it is in Chile. So that's the reason, kind of like how I got into that, and what one of the kind of like unexpected outcomes was the fact that pretty much no one had written about philanthropy in Chile before. So kind of like unknowingly, I became kind of like the only person who had researched and written and published a paper on philanthropy in Chile, and which has now been a reference in like a lot of studies and whatnot. And since there's other studies that have come out, but I guess it was as a student, it was really rewarding to feel that what I had written and spent so much time on was something that was actually read and used by NGOs and by decision makers and whatnot.
What were some of the conclusions that you found?
So I think that the biggest question or area of discussion when you think about philanthropy and people that discuss differences between countries is the role that legal incentives play and tax incentives. And it's easy to say that it's all about tax incentives. But I think my conclusion was that tax incentives definitely play a role, but the bigger explanation is cultural. So tax incentives play a role on the margin, maybe 20-30%, but don't explain for order of magnitude differences. And I guess, so the first point was no one actually knew how much philanthropy there was in Chile. So in the US, it's well studied. It's probably evolved since, but it's around 2% of GDP, individual philanthropy. And in Chile, no one had any idea. But I started looking into it and started looking at available material and research and came up with a proxy that was roughly 0.2 to 3%. So about 1/8 of the philanthropy in Chile versus the US. Studies that have come out later have corrected that to like 1/10. So it's like 10%, but an order of magnitude of difference. So yeah, so the question, so then you look at other countries around the world, not only the US and Chile. I think a big important conclusion is it's not that Chile is doing really badly in philanthropy. It's that the US is an outlier, and in all the world is far and away the largest country in terms of philanthropy, and the rest are just lower. So it's not that Chile is doing bad. It's that the US is doing great. And if you look at kind of like the follow-up countries that trail after the US, it's the UK and then Australia. I don't remember the countries exactly, but I remember the top 5 are all kind of like Anglo background, cultural Protestant countries. So there's something there. So it's just adding to the cultural component.
Interesting. And it's sort of interesting tangentially too, because if you look at startups and investing in new things, it's not really philanthropy, although
there's a little bit of that, yeah.
At
sometimes,
an early stage.
yeah, seed investors or angel investors.
Yeah, and there wasn't really that until very recently in LATAM. It's starting to build more and more now, but I think I bet it's more connected than people would think.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and in the U.S. at least you see a lot of the angel investing activity driven by successful entrepreneurs. And I think one of the challenges in Latin America when you're thinking about investing and promoting entrepreneurship and startups is the relative absence or just much lower concentration of entrepreneurs that have made it. And so there's just a smaller amount of capital available for this kind of like giving back and investing in entrepreneurs that are kind of like at the starting out their entrepreneurial journeys.
And so in 2014, you decided to go study again.
Yeah.
After having gone and done different entrepreneurial things, some NGOs. Why did you decide to go back to study, and how did it impact what you decided to do after?
Yeah, so I think I did a program at Singularity University in 2012, which was an amazing experience. I got to be in kind of like NASA's campus in Silicon Valley, surrounded by interesting people and thinking about interesting things. It was 10 weeks long, and after it was over, it's like, this is way too short. I want to be back for longer. So I guess one of arguably the biggest drivers of me wanting to do a master's program was just kind of like wanting that experience of being in a world-class university or kind of like learning environment for a longer period of time. Also, when I had been in Harvard in 2008, I was only there for a semester, so 6 months, so it flew by, and I was like really left with wanting more. So I sort of knew that I wanted to do a master's at some point in my career. The what I wasn't so sure about. And I ended up going for an MBA, partly because it was the most flexible program I could find. So it was a program that would enable me to kind of like indulge in many different interests and be very flexible in the curriculum and the courses I took and just kind of like the areas I could go into. So part of my drive was the curiosity to just go into interesting topics that I found were interesting without a specific overarching theme, as in engineering or as in psychology, and the MBA was arguably one of the most flexible curriculums I found.
And what would you say are some of the biggest takeaways from your time at Stanford?
So I think for sure the people you get to meet is it's cliche, it's what everyone says, but it's truly a powerful part of the experience. And it's not only because of a kind of like the value of the network, but also it's all personal relationships. So it's not people you meet; these are friends, friends who happen to then go to work in some of the most interesting companies in the world, and who are generally driven and kind of like very very hardworking and work their way up and become kind of like suddenly important people who are in a position to give you valuable help and just give valuable advice and open doors and whatnot, and just kind of like having the opportunity to be surrounded and have these relationships was a big important takeaway, professionally and personally, and also just as I was saying, the experience to indulge in curiosity in an academic environment was a very stimulating experience for me.
So going back to your business, how did people who wanted to watch soccer when they were outside of their home country do it before Fanatiz?
Yeah, so it depends country by country, so there's some variance to the answer, but in general, fans were had to use illegal services. I guess the most well-known is called Roja Directa, which everyone who kind of is a sports fan of some form nods their head when they hear about Roja Directa, and it inevitably also comes with a kind of like a grimace of such a bad experience, full of pop-ups and unreliable streams that fall through. Sometimes the commentary is in random languages, and it's just like a painful experience. But fans want to watch content, and if there's no other alternative, they're desperate and they'll do whatever it takes. And it's not their fault that they use illegal services. It's, in my opinion, was a problem of the leagues and the sports broadcasters that didn't make it available legally. So it was just this unsolved market need that was waiting for a solution.
And how quickly did it ramp up when you put the first content out there?
Yeah, so there's this classic kind of like entrepreneurial saying, build it and they will come. We all know that's not the case, or anyone who's ever built something and thought they will come realizes very quickly that they do not come. And you could argue, maybe compellingly, that if you build, a platform where you can watch legally soccer, high quality, ad-free, everything, they will come. And no, they still don't come. You really have to invest in marketing, especially at the beginning, to get yourself known and to build that traction and deliver a quality service that generates referrals and creates some viral growth. But marketing is always a huge challenge, and this was no exception.
What were two of the most interesting things you did on the marketing side to get users or get to be well known at the beginning?
I think we've used Facebook quite a bit. Facebook is, well, we all know now in the years since, it's creepy how much it knows about us and how much we let them know. But it's also incredibly valuable for a marketer. And frankly, as Facebook clients, I mean, if someone likes, let's say, Boca Juniors and lives in Miami, they're actually grateful to discover that they can watch those games legally and in quality with Fanatiz. So it's not always a bad thing that these companies know a lot about us, but it puts them in a position to recommend content that is highly relevant to us. So we've used that a lot in terms of making very targeted advertising campaigns to kind of like people in certain countries where we have rights who are interested in teams that we broadcast the games of. But also, I guess from a marketing perspective, we have the benefit that fans want to watch this content. So many companies try to persuade people to consume whatever they're generating because, you know, it's new and they're trying to get it out there. This is soccer from Latin American expats. Like, they want to watch that game, so they're looking for the game. So we didn't have to persuade them to want to watch it. We just needed to let them know where they could find it. So generally, the go-to behavior when someone's watching a stream is, you know, to Google the game. So we also invest heavily in Google Ads. And frankly, all we need to do is make sure that the right keywords are there, and the click-through rates are ridiculous. The cost per click is super low. So from a just digital marketing metrics perspective, it works really well just because we're solving a real pain, and they gobble up the ads, frankly.
So speaking of content, what kind of matches can people watch?
So it depends on where you're at, and the world of sports content licensing is pretty complicated and nuanced. But we, in some part or other of the world, we've distributed or are distributing the leagues from Argentina, Brazil, Chile, Bolivia, some games, Peru, Colombia, Mexico, and the Libertadores and Sudamericana Cups. And we're adding an increasing amount of sports channels. So we broadcast Teis Sports, we broadcast Canal Deportivo Olímpico from Chile, we broadcast RCN, which is Colombia's national channel that includes the league games, and we're about to launch a Golf Channel Latin America, so we'll be the exclusive online partner for a Golf Channel all of Latin America. And for us, it's, although we were born with soccer, we consider ourselves a sports streaming service. And obviously for Hispanic audiences, soccer will always be the most popular sport, at least for now. But there are a lot of other sports that people also want to watch, in many cases struggle to watch. And we strive to solve those needs and those problems and make those sports available to these fans.
So for people who maybe don't know the South American leagues and cups, the Libertadores is like the Champions League from Latin America, and the Sudamericana is like the Europa League. So imagine a startup being able to have that in a country for all the expats. It's actually a pretty big deal.
Yeah, it's I never thought we would be broadcasting the Libertadores 3 months after we launched, but it goes to the point of the inefficiencies in distribution that these properties were having. And yeah, all of last year we were the only place you could watch all games of Libertadores and Sudamericana in the US, and the only place where you could watch it in Canada. And that's just because no one was distributing it in Canada. And in the US, the channels that were broadcasting it, Fox Sports specifically, wasn't able to put all the games in the programming just because there's other stuff that competes for that scheduling time. And we had a sublicense to broadcast all the games. So there we go.
So what's next for you in the business? So
the media industry and live TV and sports in particular is changing very rapidly. It's exciting and scary. There are very big players that are kind of like increasingly awakening to the fact that online distribution is about to disrupt their business, and that creates opportunities for us as a startup and also threats and kind of competitive pressures. But I would say 2019 is a year in which we are deciding how to approach our strategic partnerships and how to work with these bigger companies in order to create a kind of like grow to the next level. So today we're still a kind of relatively niche play for Latin American expats wanting to watch soccer, but we see a much bigger opportunity. And the question is, how do we navigate this evolving and changing industry in order to build up our position and really help more fans access the sports they want to watch?
So one of the interesting things that I think is one of the things that's interesting about your business is that it's pretty much a native LATAM business where you're finding a need that the local economy wants, and it's not just a copycat of other businesses. And I see that as kind of that next wave of businesses that will come out of LATAM where they're actually like LATAM first, but actually have applications outside of LATAM. How do you think about the LATAM ecosystem and how it's been growing in terms of more venture capital and companies? And do you see a similar sort of progression from copycats to maybe some native business models?
That's a big question. As we talked about earlier in the podcast, I spent a lot of years kind of working to promote entrepreneurship in Chile. So I feel very passionately about the cause of startups and entrepreneurship in Chile and Latin America in general. And although I think it's come a long way, I think there's still an enormous amount of barriers and challenges. And I think the process of starting my own company has really helped me see from kind of like the inside what some of those challenges are. I moved from California to Chile when I decided to start Fanatiz, and sort of quote unquote incubated Fanatiz for the first 2 years from Chile. But once we reached a certain size and certain scale and wanted to take it to the next level, I saw for different reasons that it was going to be very difficult to do that from Chile. And I actually moved to Miami about in the past 6 months or so, essentially to open up our headquarters in Miami and work from there in terms of building out the partnerships and bigger picture fundraising as well. And I think that takes me to one of the challenges, which is funding and the VC environment in Latin America. I think there's a pretty active seed fund stage. So it's always hard to raise capital, but there are more people or institutions available to sign 50, 100, 150K checks. But once you get to the point where you need to raise maybe a Series A in the like several millions of dollars, the amount of institutions that are available to sign investments of that size shrinks really, really rapidly. It's very shallow. So I would say one of the big challenges is the depth of the capital pool for scale-ups more than startups. And so that's one of the big drivers that drove me to the US as well.
What advice would you give to US funds or maybe angel investors that can write a bigger size check to why they should be looking at LATAM companies?
So I think as an entrepreneur, it's a problem. As an investor, it's an opportunity because of the relatively harder access to capital that Latin American startups face. Inevitably, their bargaining position to negotiate terms is weaker. So from an investor, that's a good thing because you can push valuations down and have higher returns on your fund. So I think and hopefully that, let's say, market unbalance creates the incentives that draws more capital from around the world to Latin America, and it corrects itself. But right now, I think there's a market inefficiency that is there to be fixed, and that's good for startups and that's good for investors. But there's a need.
What advice would you give to LATAM entrepreneurs who want to raise, whether it's in LATAM or the US or both?
I don't know if there's any blanket advice. I think I've never come across an entrepreneur that has raised capital without suffering a lot through the process. So it's just hard. And no matter kind of like the previous experience and partners and whatnot, it's always a challenge and it's always hard to kind of get access to capital. And I think the number one advice is just kind of don't give up. Don't knock on all doors, and also when you get a no, that's not necessarily a no never. It's a no now. So don't also give up on people that have said no in the past. In many cases, you're successful raising capital when you kind of get to know an investor, present the company. Maybe he or she is not ready, is not comfortable, doesn't know enough. But if they kind of continue updated with the progress you're making, and if you continue kind of achieving milestones you said you would, maybe you come back 6 months later, a year later, and show your progress, and maybe then they will sign a check. So building those relationships and not giving up on the first no is, I think, another piece of advice that can be helpful for entrepreneurs.
That was one of the things that you did extremely well. When we first started talking about the business all the way till we finally invested, you would reach out every couple of months with, hey, this is what we've done. I said I was going to do this. I've done it, and probably actually more. You should give us money. I think that's fairly common in the U.S., but fairly uncommon in LATAM. There's only a couple of entrepreneurs, like less than 5, that do that and do a good job of it. So to all the LATAM entrepreneurs, please do that. We're completely happy, even if we say no, continue giving us the updates. And, sometimes we do invest 6 or 9 months later.
Yeah, exactly.
So what kind of books, blogs, podcasts, documentaries, anything like that do you like or would like to recommend that people take a listen to?
Yeah, I've been working way too hard. I haven't been too active in the book or podcast or blog area. But one podcast that I enjoy listening to whenever I can is a podcast called Econ Talk by a guy called Russ Roberts. He's an academic out of Stanford, and he just finds the most interesting people and the authors of books that are kind of being talked about or are being influential in one way or another, and just sits them down for an hour interview and asks great questions and sparks great discussions and pushes back when he has to push back and gets into arguments, which is also fun and refreshing. So that's one that I really enjoy.
So if you could go back to when you were just getting Start-Up Chile off the ground, knowing what you know today about entrepreneurship, what advice would you give yourself?
So first of all, I was part of the founding team, but I wasn't kind of like the spearheading founder. So the role is a little bit different. But there's always the same pattern of resistance to change and resistance to something new, and just having to push through and not giving up. Be it in fundraising, be it in starting a nonprofit, being it in starting a governmental program. So I think thankfully we pushed through, and I think Nico Shea, who's kind of like the leading founder of Start-Up Chile, he's incredibly stubborn and doesn't take no for an answer, which is great, and I learned enormously from him and from that experience. So I would say that's an important takeaway. And something that can be applicable across all kinds of things. So don't give up and just continue pushing.
I think that's great advice, and I'm going to be interested in watching as you don't give up growing forward with the business. So
thank you.
To do it.
No, thanks for having me.
Thanks again for listening to this episode of Crossing Borders with my guest Matias Rivera, co-founder of Fanatiz. If you want to hear more about Start-Up Chile, check out episodes with Nico Shea, John Bodegur, Sebastian Vidal, Horacio Melo, and Rocio Fonseca. Remember to check out latamlist.com and my book, Crossing Borders, if you want to go deeper into the LATAM tech ecosystem. If you like this podcast, please share it with a friend or give us a rating on iTunes or wherever you listen to podcasts. Thanks to Ankel and Sofia for helping produce this podcast, and thanks to you for taking the time out of your day to listen to it. Hope you have a great rest of your day.